A cathedral stands in the center of a plaza in Mexico City, and directly beneath it, excavated and open to the air, sit the ruins of the Templo Mayor, the main temple of the Aztec Empire, stone foundations visible below street level where archaeologists stopped digging. A few hundred feet away, a subway entrance leads straight down into a modern transit system, and coming back up out of it deposits a rider directly into that same plaza, standing between the colonial cathedral and the exposed foundation of the empire it replaced. Three distinct eras of urban history occupy the same square meter of ground, all still functioning, all still in use. Most conversations about the best designed cities in North America skip Mexico City entirely. The association tends to run toward chaos instead of design, pollution, sprawl, an overloaded megacity slowly sinking into the lakebed it was built on. This film argues the opposite. Mexico City is the best designed city in North America, and its age, its density, and its layered history are the reason, not an obstacle it succeeds despite. What follows moves outward from the historic core, through the residential districts to the infrastructure holding it all together, testing that claim piece by piece. The city began in 1325 as Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, built on islands in Lake Texcoco. It had canals in place of streets, and by the time Spanish forces arrived in the early 16th century, its population already exceeded most European capitals of the era. Bigger than Paris, bigger than London, a city its own conquerors described as unlike anything they had encountered. In 1521, Hernan Cortés took the city and rebuilt it as the capital of New Spain, using Aztec stone to construct colonial churches and plazas on top of what had stood there before. Over the following centuries, the lake was drained to prevent flooding, permanently reshaping the valley's geography and setting up the slow subsidence the city still contends with today. That layering never stopped. Mexico City is now a metropolitan area of roughly 22 million people, built literally on top of its own past. Aztec temples sit beneath colonial cathedrals, which sit beside glass office towers and concrete housing blocks, and exiting a modern subway station can still deposit a rider straight into a plaza that has served the same civic function for 700 years. History here isn't preserved behind glass, it's structural, and it keeps shaping how people move and build. The Zócalo, officially the Plaza de la Constitución, anchors that historic core and ranks among the largest public squares anywhere in the world, functioning as the city's civic heart since Aztec times. The streets surrounding it run mostly in an orthogonal grid, though certain stretches shift into something closer to Baroque planning. Diagonal streets cutting through the fabric just enough to keep the pattern from feeling mechanical. The buildings here are patinaed, heavily aged, carrying stone masonry rarely attempted in new construction anywhere on the continent, the kind of ornamental detail that would be prohibitively expensive to replicate today even with modern tools. Many of the newest structures in this district only date back to the 1920s, which by Mexico City standards counts as recent. No other major city in North America carries this degree of visible age, largely because none of them have existed nearly as long. Just west of the plaza stands the Palacio de Bellas Artes, a name that trips up most English-speaking visitors on the first attempt, and a cultural landmark that could plausibly be mistaken for something transplanted directly from Paris, built in Mexico and carrying a distinctly Mexican filter over its European bones. Old French and Spanish urbanism run through a local aesthetic no city in the United States or Canada has managed to replicate, shows up again and again throughout the historic core. It also isn't unusual to find a McDonald's operating out of a building that looks, from the outside, like it should have a plaque and a velvet rope. No city runs entirely on inherited history, though, and Mexico City's answer to modern demands sits along the Paseo de la Reforma, the corridor built to be its contemporary face. Wide boulevards modeled on European avenues run past embassies, corporate headquarters, and some of the country's most expensive real estate, the Angel of Independence monument anchoring the corridor's center. Because the city sits in an area highly prone to earthquakes, Reforma has also become a proving ground for seismic-resistant towers engineered to twist and taper rather than stand rigid against tremors. On weekdays, the corridor feels fast, efficient, corporate. On Sundays, the streets close to car traffic and joggers, cyclists, and pedestrians reclaim the boulevard for a few hours. Reforma works well as a business district, and that is the limit of what it accomplishes. Everything along it feels a little too new, too polished to carry the character found elsewhere in the city, and there's no real argument that it should try. As a business center, it simply does its job. The strongest evidence for the film's argument sits further west, in the connected pair of neighborhoods known as Roma Norte and Condesa, laid out in a series of blocks circling two central parks, Parque España and Parque Mexico, in a grid unlike the rectilinear layout found in most North American cities. Streets curve and converge toward the parks in an elliptical pattern, so a pedestrian wandering without a fixed destination tends to end up drawn toward one of the two green centers regardless of where they started, almost as if the street network itself is doing the navigating. The block sizes here run noticeably smaller than a comparable stretch of Manhattan based on rough measurement against the neighborhood's own map, shorter and narrower, giving pedestrians more route choices and shorter distances between intersections. Long walks feel considerably less fatiguing as a result and more engaging. There's also a clear hierarchy running through the streets, quiet residential blocks feeding into larger, more active avenues, and those avenues carry a design detail rarely seen elsewhere on the continent, a protected linear greenway running down the center of the road, splitting the roadway in half rather than leaving it as one continuous expanse of asphalt. It reduces the visual scale of the street considerably, cuts against the sense that the space belongs primarily to cars, and fills in a stretch of pavement that would otherwise read as wide, exposed, and scaleless. The tree selection is deliberately varied. Palms, broad-leafed varieties, the purple blooming jacaranda scattered through the canopy, and at least one tree that appears to have given up entirely, leaning at an angle no arborist would recommend, which feels like a fair thing not to judge too harshly. The roundabout at Fuente de Cibeles carries the same design instinct at a smaller scale, permeable, shaded, genuinely pleasant to pass through rather than around. What stands out most, walking through the core of Roma Norte and Condesa, is the scale of the buildings themselves. Structures lining the parks sit roughly level with the surrounding tree canopy, kept low enough that the neighborhood produces small discoveries constantly, rather than long stretches of repetition. A tucked-away cafe here, a piece of architecture that could belong in southern Spain there, and around the next corner, a building or a church that looks as though something entirely contemporary landed on top of an older structure. The mix reads almost like a collage, and that variation is what keeps the walking engaging rather than simply long. Parque Mexico extends this logic past its own formal boundary. It doesn't end cleanly at its edges. The plant canopy and the park's function both bleed outward into the surrounding streets, becoming part of the neighborhood's everyday fabric, rather than a destination visitors travel toward and then leave. Inside it, winding paths, seating for a moment of rest, and a mix of public monuments and gathering spaces see genuine daily use by residents. This is the case for mid-scale embedded parks over massive isolated ones, staying immersed in greenery without ever losing the sense of being inside a functioning city. At a few points where the parks and surrounding blocks converge most directly, the balance tips visibly toward greenery, and the streets there could use fewer cars and less parking than they currently carry. It's an honest gap in an otherwise well-executed design, not evidence against it. Further southwest sits Coyoacán, a district that feels like its own distinct town rather than a neighborhood folded into a larger metropolis, the kind of place where a visitor could reasonably forget they're still within the same city limits. At its center is Plaza Coyoacán, a genuine civic anchor framed by active civic architecture, and it carries the film's central design argument most directly. World-class cities make their districts legible, and a multi-purpose public square that functions as an actual town square, not a decorative one, is one of the clearest ways to achieve that. Coyoacán's architecture leans bohemian 16th century colonial structures, colorful facades, narrow cobblestone streets, and it's also home to the Frida Kahlo Museum. More than its preservation, though, what defines Coyoacán is how deliberately slow it is. Narrow streets, irregular block patterns, and frequent plazas quietly prioritize lingering over movement. Plenty of modern cities try to manufacture exactly this atmosphere, usually with a pedestrianized shopping street or a curated plaza dropped into an otherwise car-dependent grid, and rarely manage it. Coyoacán never tried. Its sense of place comes from restraint and from letting the neighborhood stay distinct rather than optimizing it into something more generic. Mexico City is not one single experience repeated across its footprint. Each district carries its own identity, and connecting them requires a transit system built to match a metropolitan area of roughly 22 million people, one of the largest networks in the world. Heavy rail forms the backbone, running underground through the historic center and out toward the edges of the metro area, while rapid bus corridors handle the routes rail never reached. Cable cars, still unusual for a North American transit system, carry commuters over hillside neighborhoods that climb too steeply for a conventional rail line to serve well, turning what would otherwise be an hour-long detour into a short ride above the rooftops. None of it is elegant in the way a smaller city's transit network might be. It is a genuinely functional system, built at the scale the city actually demands, rather than the scale a planner might have preferred on paper. None of this amounts to a claim that Mexico City has no real problems. Its relative affordability compared to a city like New York has drawn a steady wave of newcomers in recent years, remote workers and long-term visitors among them, and that demand has pushed up local prices in ways residents have raised legitimate concerns about, a challenge the city is still working to manage. Crime is a real consideration for visitors and residents alike, worth staying informed about even without a specific incident to point to. And the city continues to sink slowly, a direct consequence of the drained lake beneath it, an ongoing, managed condition rather than a crisis, but not one to wave away either. Mexico City is not a perfect city, because no great city is. What it does well, it does at a level few cities in North America even attempt. Return to that plaza where this film began, the cathedral standing on the excavated foundation of the temple it replaced, a subway entrance that's a short walk away, 3 centuries of urban design still functioning within the same square meter of ground. That is the clearest possible summary of what makes the design work. A city built to be layered, walked, and genuinely lived in rather than simply passed through.